Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Janina Doyle, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode where today we are diving deep into the world of Australian Shiraz, exploring the oldest producing vines, the regions that deliver the best value, and how climate and soil shape these wines we love. I am joined by Huon Hooke, one of Australia's most respected wine voices and the lead reviewer of The Real Review. Huon has been writing about, judging and educating on wine since 1983, and he has tasted Shiraz from every corner of Australia. He's seen it all, from the oldest Shiraz vines in the Barossa to emerging cool climate regions, and today he is here to unpack it all for us. Stick around until the end because we are jumping all over Australia, starting with Barossa, the premier wine producing region in South Australia, but then jumping across to Hunter Valley, north of Sydney in New South Wales, then back west to Clare Valley, just north of Barossa, and on to Heathcote and Grampians in Victoria. Definitely have a map handy to get extra benefit from this episode as we explore the different Shiraz styles, compare these regions, and hear Huon's insights on what to look for and what to try and what's next for this iconic grape. By the end, you'll walk away with a new understanding, appreciation, and definite enthusiasm for Australian Shiraz. So find yourself a bottle of Aussie Shiraz, or 2 or 3 to compare. Pour your glasses and enjoy the episode. Huon, before we dive in to the regions, I would love to just pick your brain and see, can you think of, when I say your favourite vineyard visit, does something just jump out? Is there something from all of these years of travel that stays with you and just captures the spirit of Australian Shiraz? Or not Shiraz?
Well, I guess my favourite sort of seminal visit to a vineyard wouldn't have involved Shiraz probably, but
Wow, yeah.
yeah, I mean, thinking like when I lived in Albury, I worked in the newspaper there and I would go to Rutherglen, and Bill Chambers was in charge of the Chambers winery at Rutherglen. Of course, he made some wonderful Shiraz. He made really good table wines, red table wines, but his fortifieds were his favourite wines, and his famous wines, and still are. So I can remember tasting his very old muscat out of a teaspoon because he would pull it out from under the counter for anybody that he thought was worth charming with it, and then he would pour it into a teaspoon because you couldn't really pour it into a glass. It would stick to the insides, and you'd spend the next 5 minutes trying to get your tongue into it, you know?
I mean, that's a nice experience as well. So actually, is it the experience of tasting this Rutherglen Muscat from a spoon, or is it actually going through, did he visit these vineyards?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, God, yes. Yes, I mean, Chambers vineyards are right next to his winery, as a lot of people's are in Rutherglen. You know, that was a long time ago. I hesitate to tell you how long ago that was. That was
divert, moving on. Well,
so I was, getting interested. Well, yeah, I was.
So actually, you say getting interested. Was this actually the start of really getting into wine? Do you think, did you start with the stickies? Is that what brought you into the wine industry properly?
Not really, no. I did a cadetship on a newspaper in the Riverina, and that was a good place to start because Riverina wines are really cheap. And I always think that people should start their tasting experience, their learning experience at the bottom rung of the ladder and work up and not come in at a high level. People who come into wine at a high level don't really appreciate the quality the same way, it seems to me. If you learn about from the ground up, I'm not saying that the Riverina only produces cheap wine, but that's what it specialises in. And that was a great place for me to learn. Yep, I went upwards from there.
Well, let us now explore
the grape variety Shiraz and all of its quality levels.
Ooh.
So maybe just to warm us up, like a quick fire round, educate us on the oldest producing Shiraz vines in Australia. Where are they? What do they taste like?
Well, that's an easy one. The oldest ones in the Barossa, or in Australia as well, that I know of, are 1847. And those are the Freedom Vineyard Shiraz at Langmeil. They were planted obviously in 1847 by a guy called Christian Oricht, who was one of those Silesian migrants who came out from what is now Poland to establish the vineyard scene in the Barossa Valley. And that vineyard is still going really strongly and produces a wine which the Lindner family, who own it now, still produce and bottle it as an individual vineyard wine. But it's not the only really ancient vine. Barossa has got lots of old vineyards from the 19th century. The Henskes, I was up at the Henskes just last week. The oldest vines on the Hill of Grace vineyard date from the 1860s.
Yeah.
The Hunter Valley has quite a few 19th century vineyards. Tyrrell's own a lot of them, Pleasant as well. Torbreck down in Victoria, they have Shiraz vines going back to the 1860s. Best have very old Shiraz vines. This is, you can find them in quite a lot of places, but the Barossa really has the majority of them. The Barossa's never had phylloxera either, of course. And, of course, phylloxera would have wiped out a lot of vineyards which might have been old by now. But touch wood, the Barossa has never got it.
I have to say I'm very lucky to have travelled around Barossa, and I have stood in the Hill of Grace vineyard. And there is something I remember standing on the end. It's not a very big vineyard, is it? And at the end, it's quite flat and very open plan. And you've got that gorgeous church in the background.
Yeah.
And then I remember this one incredibly gnarly vine that had really wrapped itself right around the post at the end, giving this post and the whole row of vines like a hug. It's quite a moment when you see these vines that are hundreds of years old. It's quite powerful, isn't it?
They look like old soldiers, don't they? They look like crazy old men waving their arms around. If you see them in the winter when they don't have leaves on them, you can see their arms sticking up and waving around in curlicues. It's really quite interesting.
I haven't heard anyone describe it like that, and now you have. I'm like, yes, I won't. Now I can't unsee it. Okay, so everyone, there you go. Look up these wineries for some old vine Shiraz. What is currently the most expensive Australian Shiraz on release right now?
Oh, well, we've already mentioned it. Hill of Grace.
Well, Hill of Grace.
Hill of Grace. Yeah, it was the 22 vintage is going to be released in a few weeks on the 6th of May at $1,100 a bottle, Aussie dollars. And it's gone up $100 from last year in one hit. So,
my God.
But later in the year, Penfolds will do their annual range release. It sits at $1,000 at the moment. So let's see if they get into a bidding war with the Henskes. It's quite
interesting.
Mm.
What about Torbreck?
Yeah, well, Torbreck's got a wine called the Laird, which is about $800 to $900. That's it's right up there. Then there's a few others.
Oh, it's only $800.
That's cheap. It's cheap. I find it really bemusing that people are, just about everybody, trying to release a super duper wine in minuscule quantity that they put some absurd price on. And if you ask me, I think, can a wine be worth that sort of money? And I reckon intrinsically, no wine is worth that sort of money. But you have to put them in a world context. And when you see the prices of these other icon wines in other places, other parts of the world, you have to say that it can be justified. Because there's so much history and pedigree behind these wines too.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. So in terms of a wine experience, because I think that is the point, you are not paying for the actual quality. Of course, it's far better than the rest of the wines, but is it worth it? Is it giving you good value? No. You're paying for the experience of trying something that is beautiful, that maybe talks of a sense of place. So in terms of tasting something special, what is the oldest vintage of Australian Shiraz that you personally have tasted? I'd love to know, how do you feel it evolved? How was it structurally and aromatically?
You've got me there because I didn't actually research that. But look, straight off the top of my head, Just the other day, a few weeks ago, I found a bottle of 1953 Woodley's Treasure Chest, Claret as they called it then. It was Shiraz
Oh gosh.
Coonawarra. Coonawarra Shiraz made by the legendary Bill Redman, who was the great-grandfather, I think, of the current winemaker. So he was John Riddick's first winemaker at what became Wynn's Coonawarra Estate in Coonawarra. Wasn't called that until the Wynn family bought it, of course. But that wine was made in that winery, that famous stone winery, in 1953. And it was pretty tired, but it was still enjoyable. It's an amazing thing how wine can age, isn't it? It's astonishing. Sweet wines tend to age the best, but this is a dry red. It's got no, modest alcohol and no sweetness to help preserve it. It's just the intensity of fruit, I suppose, that kept it going.
And I suppose also as well, this conversation as well is like, how old can you age this wine? And the conversation is always, well, how do you want your wine? Do you want it full of primary, gorgeous, ripe, bursting fruits? Or do you like the savoury, earthy? And I imagine you said it was tired, so it was past its best, but I imagine it was very dried fruits and earth and saddle leather. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
A bit of old saddle leather, but complex, in its way. And it's quite amusing when you first show people who've never tasted really old wine, you give it to them, sometimes they really hate it and think, God, that's not really wine anymore. And some of them think, gee, that's actually quite fascinating, because they get the whole idea of, this is just a food. It's just made from grape juice, and yet it can age that long. It's amazing.
Yeah, and actually it's funny, isn't it? I've had some very old Shiraz before, but it's the same for most wines. It's when you think Shiraz is tends to be a full-bodied grape variety, and then you have it when it's 30, 40 years old, and of course it's super brown, it's so pale in the glass, and then you taste it and it's really light. There's hardly any weight at all anymore. So it's structurally, it's so entirely different. But yeah, if it's not oxidized, it just might not have the power. So it's it's a personal preference, I guess.
And now that we're talking about it, of course, I've just been to Henske's, as I told you, and we were celebrating the 70th vintage of their second most famous wine, Mount Edelston. And that's actually started 2 years before Hill of Grace did. And they had some bottles of the 1956, which was the first one. And would you believe it was one of the best wines of the tasting? It was extraordinary. It was beautiful.
Why? Why was it? Why? Tell us more. Why?
Why was it so good? Well, obviously it had a good cork, and it had been in a very good cellar its entire life. And I can even tell you whose cellar it was in. It was in Colin Gramp's cellar. Colin Gramp was of the family that created Orlando Winery, Jacobs Creek and everything else. So the Gramp family were the people who began that. Colin he's passed away now, but before he died, as a very old man, lived in the Barossa, and he said to Stephen Henske, I've got some old bottles. I've got some of your first vintage of 56 Mount Edelston. Would you like them? Stephen said, well, would I what?
Mm-hmm. My gosh.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That's a nice gift,
fun.
isn't it?
It's fun being in this business.
This is why it's those experiences that you cannot pay for. Okay. For those people listening, many people are not in the wine industry. So what region do you think is most underrated for Shiraz right now?
I would say Langhorne Creek, because Langhorne Creek is not well known. It's not well known. It only has a handful of wineries, only a handful of cellar doors, but it's been there for a very long time. People like Bleasdale, they're a really old winery. Lake Breeze makes beautiful wines. Bremerton makes beautiful wines. But the history of Langhorne Creek is that a lot of the big companies used to buy the grapes, and most of the grapes from the area went trucked out to the Barossa or wherever. And those companies, I won't name them, but it was in their interest to suppress the fame of Langhorne Creek, because that kept the price of the grapes down.
Look at that.
So poor old Langhorne Creek got the rough end of the pineapple, and it's been suffering from that ever since. But, the consumer's the winner, because the wines are really good and they're very affordable.
Interesting. Where is Langhorne Creek? If somebody's thinking, on the map, exactly, take us there.
So, if you go south from McLaren Vale, you head down the coast from Adelaide, you run through McLaren Vale, then you can go past, you go down to where the Murray River enters the sea at Lake Alexandrina, and that's where Langmeil Creek is. And a fair bit further on is Coonawarra, Rattonbully, quite a lot further south. So it's on the coast or just inland. It's a cooler area than, say, Barossa and McLaren Vale. So it's actually, I think, for Cabernet, I think it's actually a better region than the Barossa and McLaren Vale.
Interesting.
But we're talking about Shiraz, aren't we?
We're allowed to divert for a second. There you go. Listen, everyone, tip, quick, Cabernet Sauvignon, Langmeil Creek, tick. What about, and we will talk about all of these wine regions and what they bring for Shiraz in a second, but what region do you think also is going to deliver the best value for money? Is it still Langmeil Creek, or would you say somewhere else if someone is buying wine with their own money?
Oh, look, there are several regions that I think produce consistently good value, and everybody knows Margaret River, but just north of Margaret River is the Geograph area. Have you heard of Geograph? Because it's...
I personally have not. So educate me.
It flies under the radar.
Right.
There are, there are quite a lot of vineyards there. They're really struggling to make a name for themselves because everybody thinks of Margaret River when they think of WA. Then they think of the Mount Barker sort of Great Southern area, and then they might think of the Swan Valley, but they rarely think of the Geograph region. But it's good, and probably because it's not well known, that's why the wines are very, very well priced. A bit closer to where I am in Sydney, there's what we call the Hilltops area, which is inland from Sydney, about 3 hours. And it's quite high altitude, so it's sort of 400 metres altitude. So pretty good vineyards there too. But there's only about 1 or 2 wineries at the moment. It's just, it struggles to be known.
Interesting. Well, so if somebody has some money, maybe they should buy a plot of land there. Maybe that could be a tip. Well, no, you don't make money having a vineyard, but who knows?
That's true.
Okay, before I start really going deep diving into these regions, for you personally, if you were buying a Shiraz to open up on a very special birthday, where would you go? Or what style? Is it a region you would choose? Or
look, I come from Western Victoria. That's where I was born and raised, and not very far from Great Western, which these days is part of what's called the Grampians wine region. And I just think the Grampians region, even not accounting for the fact that I come from there, it's one of my favourite regions for Shiraz because it's quite a cool climate, but it's not so cool that the wines are too light. They're really powerful, full-bodied wines, but they're spicy, they're elegant, they're intense, they age terrifically well. And if you've been lucky enough to try an Old Best Great Western or an Old Seppelt Great Western Shiraz, wow, that's really something. These days, Seppelts call it St. Peter's is their top vineyard single vineyard wine. Yeah.
Okay. I love this. I'm like, everybody, take a note, write this down. We've already got so many things that we need to try. I think, okay, what the point of this episode as well was to kind of really identify Shiraz across Australia. And I don't know whether people would then be able to choose their favourite stylistically, or even for those people studying, doing blind tastings, how would they differentiate between one versus the other? We have to start with Barossa Valley, I think, don't we? So I obviously would always say big and plush and round. How would you talk about Barossa Valley in terms of fruit profile, tannin, alcohol?
Well, the Barossa, of course, is not just one place. It's got several sub-districts, and probably the most famous and most statuesque Shirazes in the Barossa come from the northern Barossa. So the sub-regions are Ebenezer, Marananga, Greenock, Seppeltsfield, those sort of areas, Stonewell. These make what I would call ferruginous wines. They're wines that have there's a lot of ironstone in the soil there, and it might just be the imagination, but the wines have this ironstone character, this ferrous character to them. A bit like Barolo often has that, but it's a different kind of ferrous, and it's stony. It's like you can smell the blackberries and the a touch of mint sometimes, and the earthy characters, dark plums. But there's always this overtone of broken rock or, ironstone, which I really like. Some people say graphite. Some people use other words like bitumen or tar. All of those things add to the suite of aromas of great Barossa Shiraz from the north. Underneath that, you've got all your black fruit characters, of course. That's northern Barossa to me. Full-bodied for sure, but there are some people now in the Barossa trying to make more elegant wines. Not, they're moving away from the old style. I think for many years now, people have been using less oak and less extraction, and so they're not as tannic and as bruising as they used to be. And oaky, I mean, everybody all around the world now, I think, has seen the light. Too much oak obscures the fruit character, obscures the terroir, obscures everything that we love about wine. So, and new oak costs a lot of money. So why the hell do you buy these new barrels and fill your wine up with this oak taste? That's ridiculous. So people have moved away from that, and I think that's happening in the Barossa too. There are still people who are making the old school style, but they're probably not as numerous as they were.
Would you differentiate? So you talked about Barossa. Would you differentiate Eden Valley, which is to the east of it, as I always say, like bluer fruit, fresher?
Yep.
But how would you describe the Eden Valley compared to Barossa Valley?
Yeah, bluer is fine. Red fruits as well. But I'd say spicy. There's more spice in Eden Valley fruit because it's a cooler climate. And the cooler the climate, the more spice and pepper, of course, cloves, those sorts of characters can be seen in the wines. But also they have this dried herbs character like thyme or oregano or sage. Sage, I find dried sage is a dominant character in a lot of Henske wines. It's just beautiful. And it just gives you another level of interest on top of all the other things that are going on.
I've always loved a little bit of Eden Valley fruit. But this is not about my preferences stylistically. What about going across now all the way to the east to Hunter Valley? You already mentioned Tyrrells. They have some really old Shiraz in Hunter Valley. It's a very distinctive, and I think presumably as well, quite particular if you're blind tasting, because the climate is so different. I feel like this is a much more, almost a savoury, nuanced Shiraz. How would you describe Hunter Valley?
Well, that's a hard one. Because Hunter Valley, it's interesting because Hunter Valley, I think, is one of the most distinctive styles of Australian Shiraz. And it's a unique area because it's climatically so different from the rest of Australia. It's influenced by the eastern weather. 99% of Australia is influenced by western weather. So that's a difference to start with. Then you've got the soils, which are very old red volcanic soils predominantly, where all the great red vineyards are. And it's a medium-bodied wine. It's never a very heavy one, which appeals to me. I'm much more of a medium-bodied sort of guy. The older I get, the lighter I like my wines and the more elegant I like. And I think that's...
Me too.
Yeah, it's a common trait.
Agree.
Yeah, a common trend. But how do you describe it? Well, in the old days, they used to talk about the leathery character, the sweaty saddle, which, you don't see sweaty saddle these days, because I think that was a microbiological fault. Most people in the Hunter are well on top of that now, so they're making much cleaner wines. But you still get these interesting earthy and graphitey and sometimes tarry, but like also the leather thing, but clean leather, not dirty leather. Not like the smell of an old skin of a dead animal.
You're like, what do I say?
Sound really appealing, aren't I? But yeah, they have a distinctive character. The other thing about talking about the similarity between the terroir and the wine, as there was in the Barossa, the Hunter Valley, the upper Hunter Valley, some distance from the vineyards, is a big coal mining area, huge coal mining area. And I reckon you can get a kind of a coal dusty character in some of the Hunter Reds. And that doesn't sound very appealing when you say it like that, but it actually is. I think earthy, rocky soil type characters are very, very interesting in wine. I mean, chalky wines of Chablis, for example, or Champagne, chalk from the chalky soil. I'm really struggling to describe it. The best way to get to know Hunter wines is to taste one.
There we go, everybody. There's the advice. Oh, he's giving us permission to drink. We'll take it. Well, you mentioned like soils and what it can give to flavours. So I'm thinking then of taking you over to Heathcote, because this is an area that's famous for its Cambrian soils that I believe geologically are like some of the oldest on the planet. Like 500 million years ago they were formed, if I'm not mistaken. And so there's lots of iron-rich red earth there. So talk to me about how that affects the Shiraz from Heathcote.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is ancient soil, and Australia is full of ancient soils. I mean, we look across the Tasman at New Zealand, and if you set any store by the age of soils, you'd have to say New Zealand is a Johnny-come-lately, because their vineyard was underwater most of the time that ours were being formed. And then they had volcanoes, of course, and floods, which changed the terrain enormously. And we had a lot of volcanoes, of course, in the formative ages. But yeah, and the Heathcote Mount Camel Range, as it's called, is a strikingly red volcanic soil, and it's quite extraordinary. That's the northern half of Heathcote. In the south of Heathcote, a little place called Torbreck, as you come up from Melbourne, that's granite. It's quite different soil. So there are two halves of Heathcote, and I think that's one of the things that makes the area interesting, because granite gives you a slightly different, I think, style of wine, plus it's a little cooler in the south. So the further north you go, the warmer it gets, and the bigger, more powerful, more chocolatey, and more expressively black-fruited the wines become. Think of Jasper Hill, for example. That's probably the most famous, and Wild Duck Creek. Those are the two most famous wineries there. They make these big, big wines which have lots and lots of fruit, lots of black fruits. And people just love them, because big red lovers love those wines, for sure.
Interesting, because that has just completely changed my perception, because I would have said, and this is why I love having someone like yourself on the podcast, because I don't taste enough Shiraz from, by the way, I'm saying Heathcote, and you sound to be saying how are you pronouncing this?
Heathcote?
Heathcote, okay.
Or Heathcote, it doesn't matter. Both of them are accepted.
Heathcote. But I always thought that this was Shiraz it has dark fruit and intensity, but not so big, not so plush, not so flamboyant. But it sounds like actually some of the Shiraz coming out of here can be a little bit showy.
It's certainly
it's
in your face. That said, most of them there are making several different styles of Shiraz. So the cheaper ones tend to be lighter, and the blockbusters tend to be expensive. Don't ask me why that's the way it is, but that seems to be the way of the wine world, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
They want to make a reserve wine. They get the most concentrated fruit and the most in-your-face fruit and make something really striking out of it. Those wines can be, a little too much when they're young, but they're wines that come into their own with age. They get more elegant and more complex and more interesting and more approachable, I think, when they get older. The tannins soften, of course, too.
Interesting. I just thought we should probably point out, when we talked about Hunter Valley, we were all the way over in the east. Now we're in the Victoria region, aren't we? How, in terms of because I know I can think about on the map, but where are we in terms of Victoria? We're just kind of bang in the middle of that region.
It's a bit to the east of the centre of Victoria. Okay. But if you imagine where Melbourne is, if you get in your car and drive north for 2 hours, you can get to Heathcote.
Right. Okay. And would I be right in saying then that maybe, let's say, a blind tasting of a Heathcote Shiraz compared to more fresher, less oaky Barossa Valley Shiraz, actually, it would be confusing. It's not necessarily like Heathcote has this very definable identity. That could be quite difficult to pick.
It can be indeed.
Yeah.
One thing about Heathcote, it is much cooler, much more southerly It's still a warm area, but it has higher acidity. So I've heard from many growers there that they're waiting and waiting and waiting for the acid level to drop in their grapes. And so, in the early days, people like Wild Duck Creek would say, that's why my wines are so big and so high in alcohol, say up to 15%, because we have to wait for the acid to drop, otherwise it's too high. So this is an unusual problem. Most people in Australia would be hoping to, preserve the acidity in their wine. But in Heathcote, they can have the opposite problem.
That's very, very interesting. Okay. Well, now you're talking about, say, acidity levels. Thinking about then kind of going back now towards Barossa, but then further up north to Clare Valley. So Clare Valley makes Shiraz, but very often I don't think that's the first grape you think of. You're often thinking about Riesling, but they're doing some great reds in general, red blends. This is a place that has quite warm days and cool nights. So stylistically, what do you think about Shiraz? How do we fit that into the conversation?
Clare, like all of these regions that we can talk about, the Clare is I think the approach of the winemaker and the location of the vineyard has more to do with the way the wines taste than the region itself. For example, down in the south of the region, you've got Mount Horrocks. And Mount Horrocks make beautiful Shiraz. That's Stephanie Toole, Jeffrey Grossett's partner. She makes her own wines in her own way, and she makes Shiraz. He doesn't make Shiraz. So there's a bit of a demarcation there. And she makes beautiful Shiraz, and it's powerful, it's full-bodied, but it's also very elegant. And it's got some spice to it, and it's got some sinew to it. And that's southern Clare Valley. Go up to the top end of Clare Valley, up round the town of Clare and even further north, you can find, say, Jim Barry, and Jim Barry makes a wine called the Armagh, which is quite expensive, several $100 a bottle. And it's a big, powerful, rich, fleshy, chocolatey sort of wine, which is opulent. It's very different to the Mount Horrocks style. So, is that the soil? Is that the maker's approach? Is it the climate? It's a combination of all things, I think. And then you go halfway and you might find Wendouree. So Wendouree is the most famous cultish winery in the Clare Valley, deservedly so. Fantastic wines, very old vines, a lot of them dating back to the 19th century. There we go again, old vines. And because they're so old, they've never been watered and they've never been fertilized. So they're growing completely naturally with very deep root systems, and they produce what I think are powerful, full-bodied wines of great elegance and balance. And I know we'll probably talk about old vines later on, but one of the glories of old vines is they produce balanced wine with beautiful textures, and that's Wendouree to me. I mean, they're famous for their Cabernet as well, and their Cabernet Malbec. Cabernet Malbec's a big thing in the Clare Valley, but their Shiraz is also just as highly rated, I think. And so there are three producers doing quite different wines, all in the Clare Valley.
Oh, I'm just like, everything's so different. We're never going to be able to blind taste. We'll blind taste the region. No, but I guess the point is, and this is always the conversation, that you have the grape, then you have the region, but then you also have the winemaker. And so there's so many variables that it doesn't make it easy, does it?
No.
You mentioned there are spicier styles of Shiraz from Clare Valley. Maybe that's my segue to bring you back to Grampians, which obviously was a region that you said that you thought you can get some really good value. I mean, this, again, from what I know, this is the Shiraz defined by spice. It's defined by pepper. Do you think that's still true? Because you didn't mention that when just saying it was good value.
Oh, pepper. Well, pepper is a feature of Mount Langmeil, which you've probably tasted. And this is, the wine research people have done analysis of the rotundine level in Shiraz grapes throughout Australia. And rotundine is what gives Shiraz its pepperiness. And the highest levels of pepperiness they found were in Mount Langmeil Vineyard Shiraz. So that's pepper central. If you want peppery wine, go to Mount Langmeil. So that's a cool area, reasonably high altitude, inland, And I was wondering if you were going to go to McLaren Vale just then, because to me, McLaren Vale is a very interesting example because it's right beside the sea. And Clare Valley is a bit further inland, and the Barossa is also a bit further inland. That gives their wines different. The proximity to the sea, I think, has a big effect on the style of wine. So you get softer tannins in McLaren Vale because you don't get the cold nights. And the nights stay warm, the tannins form in different ways. So you get firmer tannins in Clare for sure, and somewhat in the Barossa as well, because they have colder nights. Probably better acid retention too. But to me, that's a really significant factor. It's a bit like comparing the McLaren Vale with Mudgee. Mudgee is another area that has high altitude, very inland, very continental climate, not maritime. So different wines altogether.
So yeah, we forgot about, well, I say we forgot about it. I forgot about McLaren Vale. Thanks for bringing that back in.
There's a lot over.
Oh my God, I know. So yes, McLaren Vale, you're saying actually look for softer tannin structure.
That's what it naturally produces. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But then, so you said about going, so in terms of Grampians and spice, has that changed? If you were like, imagine if you were tasting Mount Langmeil, again, Northern Rhone, would you feel that that could have the most similarities?
Yeah, perhaps. But I think the wine that's most often confused for a Northern Rhone wine is Clonakilla from the Canberra District. And sorry to derail you again, but that is a wine that I've seen it mistaken for Côte Rôtie many times. People have swore black and blue that it's a Côte Rôtie, and when the bag comes off the bottle, their face sort of drops or explodes.
Well, again, and it's worth pointing out the Clonakilla, apart from the fact that actually is such a iconic wine, isn't it? But it also is a Shiraz Viognier, which Côte Rôtie in the Northern Rhone is obviously famous for having that small percentage of Viognier. So, okay, so you've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, and it has some pepperiness, but not too much. And again, in the Northern Rhone, I think you don't see a lot of pepper. You see it, but it's not the dominant character. And I remember talking to Gerard Jabelet many years ago, and because people were just starting to get excited about peppery Macedon Ranges Shirazes like Knight's Granite Hills. And Gerard said, we don't like pepper in the Rhone. If we have pepper, it is the grapes are not ripe. That really made an impression on me. I think pepperiness is to do with coolness of climate and coolness of season. You see it more in cold seasons. I don't think it's necessary to do with unripe grapes.
How would you describe Canberra District in terms of climate? Because it is quite cool climate, isn't it? There's quite high altitude.
It is. If you drive to Canberra, say from Sydney, you wouldn't believe it's high altitude because you go up gradually. And when you're around Canberra, it's wide open spaces. It's not particularly mountainous, and it's very dry in the summer. The grass is all brown, and you can't believe that it's actually 400 meters altitude and actually has reasonably cool climate viticultural conditions. So, lovely, elegant, spicy Shirazes from people like Clonakilla, and I could name a whole lot of people there who are doing very good Shiraz, but unfortunately, a lot of them are tiny producers, and that doesn't leave the country. You need to come over here and taste it over here.
How long does it take you? Because yes, you've just pointed out, when we talk about Canberra District, we are closer now. We're back over to the east. How long is it going to take you from Sydney to get there?
3 hours.
Okay. How long is it going to take you from Sydney to get to Hunter Valley? Because obviously we're now going up north.
2 hours at the most.
Interesting. Okay. So from Sydney, if you wanted to go and explore a wine region, and we can go off piste, this doesn't need to be Shiraz now. Where would you recommend that someone goes for a day trip or a long weekend?
For a long weekend, okay. Orange is about 3 hours drive away too, 3.5. Mudgee is about 3 hours drive. Orange is a wonderful place to go because it's a fast growing area. A lot of people are moving to places like Orange because of the lifestyle and because it's a growing city that has lots of facilities. It's got nice restaurants, nice places to stay. It's got all the medical and shopping facilities you might want. And it's got a thriving and rapidly flourishing wine industry. So it's not that old, but, this is only, I guess, since the late 60s, early 70s, the first vineyards were planted. So that's relatively new. But wow, it's kicking some goals, including with Shiraz.
Interesting, because also as well, the little that I know about Orange is they're actually making some really good sparkling wines as well. Is that actually what they're most known for in Orange? Like more, again, cool climate varieties, beautiful sparkling, or I just happen to be, that's what I associate Orange with.
You really opened an interesting subject, because Mount Canobolas, which is an old volcano, which is just outside the city of Orange, goes up to over 1,000 metres. And there are vineyards on the slopes of that mountain which are 1,000 metres altitude. And that's pretty high. And they produce, if the Argentinians would say that's not high at all, but it produces very, very fine, cool climate, high acid, delicate wine for sparkling wine. So you've got the Printy people making Swift sparkling, you've got De Salis, you've got various people doing really good sparkling up there. But Orange does a huge range of stuff. On the lower ground, where it's warmer, they can ripen in Shiraz and Cabernet and Merlot. Pinot Noir and Chardonnay for table wines is, again, in the cooler parts. So Orange is a bit like the Adelaide Hills. They have a range of sites where they can do a big range of grape varieties.
Interesting. Everyone, let's put it on our list. Let's go to Sydney and pop across to Orange. Okay, bringing it back to Shiraz, because that's the point of the episode. Have we touched on the majority of regions that are worth talking about for Shiraz? Or have I missed something again? Is there a more emerging region that needs to be mentioned?
Well, we've touched on a couple of regions that have recently emerged, like Heathcote and like Orange. But I would say, and the Canberra District is, I guess, it's flourished only in my lifetime, which is a very short lifetime, of course. Where else? Tasmania. I think that Tassie is the place that not a lot of people would know produces Shiraz. So global warming is having an effect down there. So for most of the Tassie wine industry's existence, they tried really hard and failed really miserably to produce Cabernet, because a lot of the vineyards down there were planted when Cabernet was very fashionable in the rest of Australia. So late 60s, early 70s, through to the 80s. But they pretty soon discovered that A, it wasn't that good, and B, people wanted things like Riesling and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris and Sauvignon Blanc. So all of those varieties are grown down there. But in the warmer parts, the lower lying parts, such as the Coal River Valley and down near Hobart and the Tamar Valley up north, you can find some really good Shiraz in a cool climate style. So not terribly big, elegant wines, medium bodied and very spicy.
Interesting. Okay, you've given us quite a lot of different styles of Shiraz and regions. In terms of where is Shiraz going now, do you think, like the future? Are people, you've obviously, less oak, that seems like an obvious one. Are people still going to be leading mainly with Shiraz as a single varietal? Do you find people are doing more blending with Shiraz? Or again, of course, the Côte Rôtie tradition of putting in Viognier. Is there any kind of tradition or any kind of focus, something that winemakers seem to be going in for Australian Shiraz?
This is it's a where do you start kind of thing. Look, Australia is, known for Shiraz. That's our number one variety. We grow more of that than anything else. We're the second biggest grower of Shiraz in the world after France. I think we have more regions that produce Shiraz than France does, and therefore we have an even bigger range of styles of Shiraz than they do. So I think we're number one as far as the variety of Shiraz grows. Just about every region in Australia grows Shiraz. So I think that even though we've got an oversupply at the moment and the whole world is experiencing a downturn in wine sales, and a lot of Shiraz producers are really, suffering, I still think that it's our it's our calling card. It's what we should stick to the knitting and do what we're famous for and what people want, because sales might have dipped a little bit, but people are still drinking a humongous amount of Shiraz because they love it. So there's that. I think that, there's a lot of new varieties being planted, all of the Italian varieties that we're trying now. But each one of those has to create a new market. It's really hard to get people to understand what Sagrantino is or what Montepulciano is. They'd say, I thought that was a region, not a grape variety, and all of this stuff. So, but everybody knows Shiraz. Everybody knows what it is. That's the one to lead with for sure. I mean, these other wines can come along in its wake, but we should continue to lead with Shiraz.
Okay.
As for how it's developing, I just think that we've discovered a lot of new places to grow Shiraz in recent, the last few decades, and I don't think we're going to see a lot of expansion in the future, not in the near future, but I'm sure there are lots of new places that could be planted for sure. And global warming is going to open up parts of Tassie that have never been planted. Tasmania has such potential, such enormous potential.
That's interesting. So that actually is your one to watch, Tasmanian Shiraz.
Yep, for sure.
I love that. Okay. Before we just kind of close out, you've done an incredible job with all of your reviewing, with the Real Review, and you've tasted so many wines. I'd love to, how has Australian wine how has reviewing Australian wine changed over the last 20 years? How do you look at it when you're tasting Australian wines?
Well, I've been reviewing wine and writing about it for over 40 years. So 20 years is kind of recent.
It's nothing.
But look, I think that I'm a traditional wine writer. My career started off and it was mainly in the print media. And the print media basically doesn't exist anymore, except for a few very rarefied magazines. There was a day when every newspaper had a wine column. Now, no more. So I think critiquing wine, it's all gone online, of course, and there's a huge demand for information about wine because people need guidance. There's so much choice out there. You've got to have some sort of guidance. Otherwise, you're sunk. You've got to wander blindly into a wine shop and shut your eyes and pick something. You might as well do that. So, look, I think the online world has opened up just an amazing opportunity for people to get information about wine. And it's just, you can get it on your phone. You can go into a shop, look it up on your phone before you go to the restaurant or the shop and decide what you're going to get. But as far as us poor scribes go, life gets more and more difficult because actually monetizing a career in wine critiquing is really hard now. It's really hard. People don't want to pay for information because they get so much information for nothing. So I've count myself incredibly lucky to have had most of my career when I could actually earn a living from it. Sure, you can still supplement your income as a writer by hosting events, and there's still plenty of demand for that. So I guess when I was starting out, the 100-point system of scoring didn't exist. And now it's everywhere, and just about everybody uses it. Dear old Jancis still sticks with her 20-point scale, and long may that continue. In Australia, we have one of our leading wine writers, Max Allen, who never scores wine, but it hasn't held back his career because he's very good. So it's not absolutely essential to score wine, but most people do it because they see that most people on both ends of the bottle, the producers and the drinkers, want a score. So there's a demand for it. So I don't know whether that's answering your question, but.
Oh, 100%. And in terms of, you said, scoring your Shiraz, the other wines, in terms of everybody going to the Real Review, and are they going to find lists of the top Shiraz of the year or wines of the year? What are they going to find when they come to the Real Review? Because they're going to need your help. They're going to need more support.
Oh, look. We invite them to ask for our support. If you wanted to, you can search our database for Shiraz at any price level you like, from any region in Australia and other parts of the world, easily. It's not hard to navigate. In fact, I think it's really good, really easy to navigate. and it'll chuck up. You can search my reviews. You can search all the other people on our team for their reviews. You can search the most expensive and the oldest and the most the rarest and the it's amazing what you can do now with this kind of searching function on internet sites. You can find we have best value ratings as well. So we have a little sticker beside something if our algorithm decrees that the balance between the score and the price is such that that's a particularly good value wine. So
love that. The AI does it for you. See, everyone, it's not even a human deciding if it's best value. There's a whole computer system behind it.
AI, yep, trying to put us all out of a job, but it hasn't just yet.
Not yet. And talking about AI, shifting that aside, the most important thing, and I think to finish off with, beyond terroir and scores and structure, what is it about Shiraz that you think brings you genuine joy? So why should we all be drinking more Shiraz?
Look, I think that when people drink a wine, they're drinking not just the liquid in the glass, they're drinking the story, they're drinking the origin. If you're drinking South African and you're drinking Chenin Blanc, then there's a big story there that I've been enjoying a lot of lately, by the way. Wonderful stuff. Australia and Shiraz are synonymous. So I think that that you can find Shiraz to suit a lot of situations. It's a good food wine. It goes with hearty food. So probably you'll find me drinking more Shiraz in the colder weather than the hotter weather. But that said, we mentioned places like Canberra District and Tasmania, Adelaide Hills. There are places that produce what I call Shiraz for Pinot lovers. This is a much lighter and easier on the palate sort of wine that you can possibly chill a bit in the warmer weather, and it would go with the sort of food that you eat in the warmer weather. So, and then again, when you're in the middle of winter and it's snowing outside, which it isn't often in Australia, but anyway, you can have a hearty Barossa from the northern area of Greenock or Ebenezer or somewhere, which will keep you nice and warm and feeling cozy in the cold.
Or a blockbuster from Heathcote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep.
My new discovery. Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you ever so much for just shining a little light on Shiraz. There's so many old vines, as you said, in Shiraz. This is the great variety of Australia. So if somebody wants to dig a little deeper, why not start with the grape that actually represents this country, right?
Here. Come out here and try some on the terroir that it's grown on, where it makes the most sense. Anyway, it's been great talking to you, Janina. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll share a glass of Shiraz soon
I
in
hope
real
we will.
life on that terroir. Take care. So I have got an idea for you. Why not try a little Australian Shiraz comparison tasting at home? So here's my thinking. Get hold of a bottle of Torbreck from the Barossa Valley, Mount Langmeil from the Grampians, and Tyrrell's wines from the Hunter Valley. All three producers export, so you should hopefully be able to get hold of them. They all have wines around the £20 mark, but I mean, if you're feeling a little fancy, they also have wines around the £50 mark too, so you can compare at different price points. But more importantly, you'll get to taste three completely different expressions of Shiraz: the plush, bolder richness of Barossa, the peppery, aromatic style of the Grampians, and the more savoury, medium-bodied style of Hunter Valley. How fun would that be? If you try it, let me know what you think, or create your own Australian Shiraz lineup with other producers. I would love to hear what you discover. My contact details, as always, are in the show notes. And whilst you're getting in contact, do not forget a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple Podcasts makes a massive difference. So if you are enjoying these episodes, do take a moment just to rate the podcast. Now, on to next week. We are heading to mainland Italy, to the beautiful green region of Umbria. Have you ever come across a white wine called Orvieto? It's made primarily from the grape varieties Crochetto and Trebbiano and has a fascinating history. So do not miss that episode. But as always, I'll leave you with a wine quote. And this is from James Halliday. He is the founder of the Australian Wine Companion and is also one of Australia's most respected and influential wine voices. And he very simply said, Shiraz is Australia's gift to the world of wine. I just love that in Australia, Shiraz tells the story of a continent through one grape. Ugh, and really, isn't that just part of the joy of wine? One grape, one place, one bottle, and yet every time you open it, there is something new to discover, a different aroma, a different texture, a different story. Wine has this wonderful way of taking us on small journeys, sometimes across continents, sometimes simply into a quiet moment at the end of the day. So wherever you are this week, I hope you find a little time for those discoveries, a new wine, a new flavour, a new experience, and plenty of those small, simple joys along the way. Until next Monday, wine friends. Cheers to you.